Welcome, everyone. I'm Melody Fox Ahmed. I'm the Associate Director for Programs here at the Berkley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs, and it's my great pleasure to welcome you to the 2016 summer presentations for the Education and Social Justice Research Fellowship. 2017. Yeah, the 2017 research presentations. I get confused about what year we are. It's 2018 already. We have four wonderful presentations for you here today, and I will just start by giving you a brief background on the project, and I will introduce the fellows, and we will get started. So the Berkley Center for Religion, Peace, and World Affairs and the Center for Social Justice, Research, and Teaching together collaborate on this project. We are now in our 9th year, which is really amazing, and we've gone to over 30 countries around the world. So what you'll hear today are the 4 countries that the fellows went last summer. So what we are offering are 4 research fellowships to undergraduates who are conducting field-based research somewhere in the world on local, context-based initiatives at the intersection of education and social justice, often supported by Jesuit or other religious communities. Fellows have conducted research in secondary and post-secondary locations in diverse countries, diverse settings, ranging from Cambodia, the Philippines, Burkina Faso, Guatemala. And what we do as the project administrators, the Berkley Center and CSJ, is we make the placements, we handle the logistical arrangements, we provide pre-departure support, including research training. The fellows are actually taking a new class this year on research methods and interview methodology. And while the field work is only 3 weeks in the summer, this is actually a year-long project when you include the preparation that they do during the spring and the report writing and interview transcribing and publication that happens in the fall. And in front of you, you have the fruits of their labors, this beautiful publication, which comprises the 4 reports that the students did, interview excerpts, and I encourage you to read it. It's absolutely wonderful. Now, before I show you the website, I just want to thank my colleagues at the Center for Social Justice, Jennifer Rosales, Andrea Whistler, Ray Shu is here, Sarah Singa, and all the staff who made this event possible today. And I want to thank the audience for joining us to support our student researchers and learn about global social justice work around the world. These sessions will surely give us all ideas that will inspire our own work here on campus and around the world. I especially want to thank our student researchers. Here we have Anastasia, Harshita, and Nick, and Mary Breen is joining us at around 12:30. So they dedicated the past year to putting in practice their commitment to advancing global social justice work. They spent the last year learning research and interview techniques, completing the IRB process, which is never easy, as most of you probably know, researching their host countries, formulating a research plan, and finally getting on planes and touching down in places most of them had never been before, spending 3 weeks getting strangers to talk to them, often in foreign languages, about the vital yet sensitive issues of how faith and education intersect to overcome severe challenges of poverty, lack of opportunity, corruption, and more to prepare young people as leaders who are improving their communities. These students research the innovative ways Jesuit educational institutions are providing opportunities for the most marginalized students, in the process listening to the concerns of the community. They conducted interviews with teachers, administrators, students, families, government officials, religious leaders, and more. Many of these individuals had never been asked to sit down and do an interview, to talk about why they dedicate their lives to education, how they see their work improving the lives of their students and the overall community, what about their faith motivates them to do this work. So this project importantly gives prominence to the vital voices of these practitioners, these educators, publishing their stories on the Berkley Center website in a collection of best practices for education and social justice around the world. And you can find all of these stories and interviews here. If you go to the Berkley Center site under students, you'll find the Education and Social Justice Project. And here we have the complete collection with our 4 most recent students who went to Mozambique, to Australia, to Ukraine, and along the Dominican Republic, Haitian border. So, for example, if we click here on Nick's, you can see his project. You can see his interviews. Some of them seem not to be up for some reason. We have interviewees. He did more than 3, I promise. let's take a look at Harshita's. I think we were just finalizing that. So here's Harshita's. Her interviews are there. Her interviewees, you can see the photos. So we really create a really active network of all the people who've been interviewed, all the people who participate in this project. They can learn from each other. They can be in conversation. So it's really great work these students have done bringing these stories to the fore. So I encourage you to go on the website and check that out. So now it is my pleasure to introduce our student researchers. We have Anastasia Sendun, who will start first. She was in the Ukraine. Then we will hear from Nick Na, who is in Australia. Then Harshita Nanampali, who is in Mozambique. And then Mary Breen, who will join us shortly, who is along the border of the Dominican Republic and Haiti. Following the presentations, we'll have the opportunity for some Q&A with our researchers. So it's now my pleasure to introduce Anastasia. I'll introduce you and then you can come up. Let me find your bio. Great. So Anastasia is a member of Georgetown College class of 2018. She's majoring in government and Spanish. She's originally from Chicago. She became interested in education through working with the DC Schools Project, which is a CSJ initiative that works with DC's immigrant community to provide tutoring and English language access. She has interned at the DC Board of Education, and she has a passion for social justice work and international affairs, which led her to apply for this project. In summer 2017, she was in Ukraine, and she spent 3 weeks at the Ukrainian Catholic University in, I'm going to say it wrong, Lviv, Ukraine. And she will now share the results of that project with us. So let me pull up your presentation. Is that the right one? Okay, great. Come on up.
All right, good afternoon, everyone. First, I just wanted to thank you all for being here, and then I also wanted to echo Melody in thanking everyone at the Berkley Center, the CSJ, and as well as my hosts at the Ukrainian Catholic University for such an enriching and powerful project this summer. All right, so like Melody said, this summer I was in Lviv, Ukraine, which is in the western part of Ukraine. So I was doing my research at the Ukrainian Catholic University. So a little bit of background about the Ukrainian Catholic University. It has existed in some iterations since 1928, although its official founding date isn't until 2002. So it was founded originally as the Greek Catholic Theological Academy in 1928, but it was closed by the Soviet government in 1944. Many of the clergymen who had worked there went underground fearing repression, but others went abroad and continued the work they'd been doing at the academy, particularly in Rome, where they opened the Ukrainian Catholic University of Pope Clement I in 1963. In 1994, after the fall of the Soviet Union, the Lviv Theological Academy was reopened, and in 2002, it was renamed the Ukrainian Catholic University, becoming the first Catholic university on the territory of the former Soviet Union. So in formulating the guiding questions for this project, one of the challenges of working in a post-Soviet context was unearthing a culturally appropriate understanding of how Ukrainians define social justice, given that the language of social justice as it exists in the West is not always comfortable for Ukrainians. And additionally, another challenge was framing how the Ukrainian Catholic University enacts its own vision of social justice, given that it is not actually a Jesuit institution, but rather an institution in the Eastern Christian tradition, which tends to be a little bit more conservative, and given that the term social justice is not necessarily part of the university's jargon. However, the two questions that I landed on were, one, how is social justice defined in Ukraine? And two, how does the Ukrainian Catholic University enact a vision of social justice? So in terms of defining social justice in Ukraine, you can see kind of three different categories that aren't necessarily mutually exclusive, but these are how participants tended to define social justice. So there are some quotes here that sort of demonstrate that. So the first was access. So by that, participants tended to mean access to shared goods, access to public life and services, such as education, healthcare, pensions, etc. Another was dignity. So the language of dignity has become particularly present in Ukraine and in the interviews, given the Euromaidan protests, which happened a few years ago, and that was considered a revolution of dignity in Ukraine. So many participants spoke in more theoretical terms, describing a society in which individuals are treated with respect, and really their full humanity is respected. And then The last way that people tended to define social justice was self-realization. So by that, participants meant the ability for individuals to have agency over their own lives, to accomplish the things they want to accomplish for themselves and their families. So in terms of what the Ukrainian Catholic University actually does to enact a vision of justice, there are sort of three main ways that are both present and future-oriented that they do. So the first is providing a quality education. So a lot of the participants identified three really big gaps in Ukraine's system of higher education. The first being corruption, so students paying bribes for better grades, or the outright buying of diplomas from different private universities. They also identified an emphasis on theoretical over practical education, so students felt unprepared for the real world by the time they graduated. And then also they identified a lack of innovation, so they felt like they were being taught things that were outdated, that weren't useful for them anymore, and that they weren't, again, being prepared for the future. So by working to overcome those gaps, the Ukrainian Catholic University is working towards social justice in the short term by providing a quality education to students in Ukraine. And then two kind of more future-oriented or kind of bigger picture ways that the Ukrainian Catholic University enacts a vision of social justice is first by modeling just processes. So the Ukrainian Catholic University markets itself as the only university in Ukraine that is not corrupt. So by making their financial records open and acting to ensure that their honor code is totally upheld, the Ukrainian Catholic University is really striving to live up to its reputation as the only not corrupt university in Ukraine. And in doing so, it is serving as a model for other institutions in Ukraine who see that success does not have to come at the price of integrity. And that, in fact, part of why the Ukrainian Catholic University is so successful is because of its high standards, which tend to attract donors and tend to attract international attention that is positive versus negative. And then the last way that UKU models a vision of social justice is by working to instill values. So one of the participants that I interviewed had a really moving quote where he said, "We are not just concerned with students' professional development. For us, it is important to shape students as good citizens, as good Christians, and as good people. This formation of students with an education grounded in values is very important." So at the Ukrainian Catholic University, the students and the administrators and professors all have this notion that they are really forming themselves and forming individuals who will shape the country's future. So quality education is key to a more just society because education provides the access to the information, the skills, and the development of critical thought that allows individuals to see themselves as informed, empowered actors within their own social and political system. And then that, combined with the Ukrainian Catholic University's emphasis on morality and Christian values, promotes a unique environment for the formation of community leaders, public servants, and professionals who advance social justice and help to ingrain notions of justice in the very institutional fabric of the organizations of which they are a part or of which they will become. So in terms of kind of bridging the two research questions, there's actually a very close correlation in terms of between the notions of social justice as defined by those interviewed and then the mechanisms by which the Ukrainian Catholic University is working to promote social justice. So first we see social justice defined as access tends to be reflected in students' access to quality education. Social justice defined as dignity is reflected in the fair and transparent nature of the Ukrainian Catholic University, which respects individuals and promotes equity. And then finally, social justice, defined as self-realization, is reflected in the empowerment of students who are encouraged to use their talents to advance the common good, and in doing so, to live lives of greater purpose. So just to give a little bit of some pictures and to reflect a little bit personally on the experience, this summer project was really moving for me because my own parents are from Ukraine, so I grew up speaking Ukrainian. Most of my family still lives there. So it was a really unique opportunity to connect with my roots, but in a very kind of personal way because I wasn't there with my parents or my family. I was really seeing Ukraine for myself and with my own eyes, my own experiences. So I was actually able to travel quite a bit. So here are some of the pictures of honestly some of the most beautiful and idyllic places I've ever been. So small villages in the western part of the country, as well as the Carpathian Mountains, some really historic churches in smaller cities, the architecture in Lviv, which is this beautiful old city. And despite all of that beauty, there's still a lot of reminders of the difficult place that Ukraine is in right now in its history. So this is some graffiti that I saw in Lviv, and this is commemorating a fight in the eastern part of Ukraine where there's currently an unofficial war going on between unidentified, but really Russian soldiers and Ukrainian soldiers. And this is an airport in that region that ended up being a site of a huge kind of battle between these two groups. So there's kind of this graffiti and there's this memory all over Ukraine of what is going on now. However, I definitely came out of this project with a different perspective on Ukraine than before. I thought that I knew what a lot of the answers I was going to get were going to be, and that's not necessarily the case. And the answers from participants that I got ended up being so nuanced and not easily reducible. They just ended up really opening my eyes to how much Ukrainians understand their own system and understand the challenges that they are going to face in the future, and as well as the challenges that they're facing now. So this project really challenged me to see Ukraine in a less reductionistic way and to critically engage with the narratives I had heard in the past and what I was seeing and experiencing for myself. So having gone when I did, I think I was able to get an insight into the country and the culture at a truly historic moment, a moment in which Ukraine really is at a crossroads. And in being at the Ukrainian Catholic University and seeing the amazing work of the people there, I can say very confidently that the Ukrainian Catholic University stands positioned to move Ukraine towards that brighter future.
Thank you so much, Anastasia. She has to go to class. We have a few minutes. If anyone has questions you'd like to ask her about her project, her research, what it's like to be an ESJ fellow, or is it her? If you can stand up and
Oh, contact information.
contact information for her. Yeah, I can share that. Yeah, see me after. If you
Yeah,
agree.
no, that's totally fine. Absolutely.
Sounds good.
Yeah, Amanda.
Does the university receive government funding, and how does that dedication to not corrupt practices and being really transparent affect perhaps their way of interacting with the government?
Yeah, it's actually a really important question because funding is a pretty controversial topic in terms of higher education in Ukraine. So, private universities, for the most part, are actually seen as being worse because they tend to be kind of someone's pocket. They're very often kind of fronts for businessmen who want to launder money, or a lot of times, like, they're set up essentially as businesses so people can kind of buy diplomas from them without actually doing any of the work. Whereas public universities in Ukraine tend to be considered better, but also have to go through this really tooth and nail fight to get the funding that they want. So there is a bit of other universities in Ukraine look at the Ukrainian Catholic University almost with a little bit of envy because they see how much funding this university is getting, especially from abroad, from Ukrainians who are living abroad. But again, a really big part of the success of the Ukrainian Catholic University is that commitment to integrity, because when people look at this university and they see how transparent it is, they're more willing to donate money if they know where it's going and if it's going towards this really this bigger mission of common good versus donating to a different university who knows where that money might go, or a different organization who, again, because of the corruption, who knows. So funding is really an important topic, and it bears stressing how unique the Ukrainian Catholic University is because it is one of only two religious universities. So like religious higher education in Ukraine is not common at all. So the Ukrainian Catholic University is really kind of like a forerunner of potentially the future.
Any other questions?
How did you figure out what jargon to use? Like, in terms of figuring out what Ukrainian terms to use, was there an existing source on social media, regular media? Sort of how did you figure out how to ask the questions you were getting at with using jargon and all?
Yeah, so to be perfectly honest, at first I just sort of did my best with the Ukrainian that I had, kind of translating very literally social justice. And actually, a lot of times when I'd be interviewing someone and I'd ask them, using the term that I was using, they would kind of pause and they would say, "Oh, do you mean like social equality, or do you mean like they would kind of substitute other phrases that were more familiar to them over social justice?" And in doing that, that actually ended up being really enlightening for me because I was able to see what terms were they using and how did that actually differ from the idea of social justice that I was really trying to get at and like the definition that I was trying to get them to critically engage with. So a lot of it also has to do with, again, the state that Ukraine is in right now with the protests at the Maidan a couple of years ago. So with that, again, the revolution of dignity, the language of human rights, the language of dignity has become much more common in Ukraine. And having gone this past summer, it was 4 years after the last time I had gone, and just seeing how different the discourse was between people and kind of how much higher minded a lot of the concerns that especially students tended to have were was really powerful. So yeah, it was definitely a little bit tricky to get at the language specifically, but I think kind of again talking around it a little bit and explaining helped me sort of hone in on what was a culturally appropriate definition of social justice.
Great. Thank you, Anastasia. Yeah, I thought that was really fascinating in your report. She talks about that in detail, the language we use, how she had to wrestle with what definition of social justice means to us in a different cultural context. And she did a really good job in Ukrainian doing these interviews, translating, transcribing, and publishing them. So thank you, Anastasia, and we look forward to your graduation and your great work in the future. Does everybody have a chair? Yes? Okay, and feel free to get food as you're coming in. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Nicholas Na, who is a senior in the School of Foreign Service, majoring in international political economy with a certificate in international development. Nick found his passion for international education in Clarkston, Georgia, through a high school refugee tutoring ministry in which he worked with children from Afghanistan, Somalia, Eritrea, Bhutan, and Nepal. During his high school summers, Nick also engaged the Navajo community in New Mexico in education advocacy. At Georgetown, he is involved with DC Schools Project, and as a 2017 Education Social Justice Fellow, he conducted research on the challenges and opportunities that First Nations students face in elite institutions in Sydney, Australia. So, Nick, let's welcome you up, and we look forward to your presentation.
All right. Well, I don't know if some of you have already noticed, but I have a black eye. What happened was I swan dove this past weekend into someone's knees while playing dodgeball. So hopefully I can get through this presentation without slurring my speech. All joking aside, though, that's me in Sydney without a black eye. That's Circular Quay. Part of Circular Quay, if you're ever there, make sure you're there with a significant other or your family because that's all the tourists there. So you could feel very lonely and you'll have to go up to a couple and ask for a photo by yourself. Anyway, all joking aside, last summer had the awesome opportunity to do research in Sydney. And I want to start first with just kind of framing why Australia matters. Okay, so when we're talking about social justice implies that there is an inherent social injustice, right? You can't have social justice without there having been some kind of injustice, right? So what is the injustice in the Australian case? Well, it's something that we call the stolen generations. Okay, so what were the stolen generations? Well, in the early 1900s, the Australian government basically put out these policies where they authorized the forced removal of First Nations children from their homes. I mean, that's pretty crazy. They would literally go to homes and, like, imagine you're a mother and you come back home and your children are just gone and you have no idea where they went. So where did these children go? Well, they were resettled into white dominant communities that were often Catholic missions. So there's also a big problem right there, right? And within these communities, why was this resettlement? Why did this happen? Well, they wanted to basically make these First Nations kids more white, right? Say they wanted to erase kind of the First Nations culture and replace it with proper values. So around 100,000 children are estimated to have been removed, and this is a staggering number because this will eventually affect not just their generation but multiple generations, and that's why we call it the stolen generations, not just the stolen generation. Um, so in 1986, there was kind of a turn in the discourse around the stolen generations when Pope John Paul II visited Australia, and in this kind of memorable speech at Alice Springs, which is in the heartland of Australia, he called for the reconciliation between the Catholic Church and the First Nations, particularly through cultural restoration. So remember what I just said, that the culture of the First Nations was erased, and so Pope John Paul II was saying, "Hey, like it's not we want to impose Catholic values on the First Nations anymore, but we want to aid, maybe even help, maybe even to support these nations in reclaiming a lot of that lost culture." So that brings me to my research question: what does social justice look like for the stolen generations, right? Because now we're talking about not just a racial kind of injustice. We're really talking about an injustice that delves into faith, into culture, into all of these different areas. So what did I find? Well, I found that kind of three big points. Social justice in Australia really looks like restoring dignity. It looks like reclaiming culture, and it looks like spiritual healing. For the purpose of this presentation, I am only going to talk about one of those points. If you want to hear the other 2 points, you can read the report, or you can talk with me at any point. How did I do the research? This is also really important, I think, because obviously with something so kind of complex as the stolen generations, it's really hard to do like a quantitative, regression analysis. I'm a political economy major, right? So it's really hard to put these things into numbers, right? So what I had to do was I conducted 20 interviews with not just students, but I conducted interviews with staff, with religious leaders, community organizers, all different kinds of people. And I really wanted to get at what's the story behind all of these different stories, right? What's kind of is there this binding narrative to how social justice is really done? So the place I was at was St. Ignatius College, which is in Riverview. It's a little suburb just located right outside Sydney, and the St. Ignatius College has this special program called the First Nations Unit. Now, the First Nations Unit, I won't go into like too much of the detail, but basically, it's they recruit, or they go out into First Nations communities around Australia and say, "Hey, we would love for some of your students in these communities to join our school." So it's a private Jesuit high school. 6 children are admitted per year. And that number fluctuates, but it's around 6, and 100% of the tuition and boarding is covered for by scholarships. So I really want to now talk about that one of the main points that I found was restoring dignity. And what's interesting about this point was it wasn't just an interview that kind of shaped what I found about restoring dignity or a culture. The restoration of dignity. One of the major things that I got to experience was the National Sorry Day Assembly, and that's a picture of the school having this. So, what is the National Sorry Day? Well, it's an annual event on May 26th in remembrance of the stolen generations. So it's the government issued this event, and it's mandated that all across the country that people have this event, right? So at St. Ignatius, though, specifically, the First Nations unit leads the entire student body in the assembly. So the assembly includes addresses, ceremonies, dances. They have a mass where it's very much kind of colored with with indigenous kind of values and traditions. So this event is really cool because it affirms first the inherent value of culture for the First Nation students. So these students get to dance in front of all of their friends, right? They show their culture, right? And it shows them that, hey, like our culture matters enough to present it in front of the whole school. And second, it educates the non-Indigenous students in the universal dignity of all people with a specific focus on Indigenous communities. So this is all led through a cultural enrichment program. So the National Sorry Day is just one kind of piece in this whole program, and the program basically it has the goal of because these kids have lost their culture with stolen generations, we want another Indigenous man, Caleb Taylor, who's employed to teach culture back to these children. So the last thing I'll say is that continuing justice is just as important as starting it, right? Paul Hine is the director of the school, and this is just a quote. I thought it was a fantastic quote, so I just want to read this out loud. He says, "At the end of this century, we need to be in a lot better place than we are now." Does that make sense? This is an intergenerational response. It's taken 200 years to mess this thing up. It's going to take at least 100 to get it right. I won't see results within my life, but later on in this century, we would like to think that, like in the States where an African American can become president, we will have an Indigenous prime minister. And wouldn't it be great if he came from here, from St. Ignatius? So that kind of really captures what the school is trying to go for. It's this idea of the Jesuit value of cura personalis, where it's caring for the whole person, not just for when they're in school and as soon as they graduate. It's like, oh well, we're done doing our part in social justice now. No, it's we want to see this continue, not just for one student but for a whole generation and multiple generations. And I think that was the most kind of compelling piece of what I found in my research. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Nick, for that fascinating presentation. We'll have a chance to ask him questions following the remaining two. So it's now my pleasure to invite up Ms. Harshita Nanampali. Let me find your bio. She is an undergraduate student in the School of Foreign Service, class of 2018, majoring in international politics with a concentration in international security and a certificate in religion, ethics, and world affairs through the Berkley Center. She's originally from San Diego, and she has been greatly involved with the Berkley Center and the CSJ. She has been a research assistant with us. She also studied abroad in Lisbon, Portugal, where she blogged for us for the Berkley Center's Junior Year Abroad Network. And last summer, she traveled to Mozambique as an ESJ fellow to conduct research at a rural, very rural Jesuit high school, which was called St. Ignatius Loyola High School, which involved a lot of travel, subsequently smaller planes and driving, and it was really an adventure. So Harshita, come on up, and we look forward to hearing from you. Let's see. Actually, I think it's next. Is it after that one? Momentinho. There we go.
Okay, hi everyone, my name is Harshita. So as Melody introduced, I traveled to Tete, Mozambique, which on the map, just to show you, it was in the northwest part of Mozambique, really close to the border with Malawi. So I just want to start by giving a little bit of historical context first about Mozambique. So it was a former Portuguese colony, and part of that system was that they basically made Portuguese the national language. So all the schooling, business, government affairs, everything is officially conducted in Portuguese to this day, although it's no longer a colony. And also during the colonial times, the Mozambican people were not allowed to study past the 4th grade. So it created this huge educational gap. It left this entire generations of people out of the educational process. And basically right after the colonial war ended, Mozambique was in the last wave of African colonies to get its independence pretty late in 1975. And after that, it was pretty much immediately thrown into civil war between the ruling party Frelimo and then the opposing party Renamo. And so that went on for 16 years until the 90s, and that completely destroyed whatever was left, essentially. And especially in the rural areas, the villages were completely burned. People didn't go to school because they were afraid of being kidnapped and being forced to work in one of the armies. And everyone basically just fled, especially in the rural area that I was in. So back to the map. ACEL, the school I was at, is a new school. It's only in its second year. It serves 8th to 12th graders, so it's kind of like a high school. They have about 600 people, and a really important part of the school is that they have a boarding school. And right now they serve about half the students, and they're trying to work to be able to house more of the people because they're able to kind of focus on that cura personalis, like whole development if they have people living there the entire year. And the other students who don't live on campus at the school live in neighboring villages. The closest one is about a 25-minute walk away, so they face additional challenges because they have to walk all the way to school. In the middle of the day, they don't get to eat lunch in the cafeteria, so they would have to go back in the middle of the day. Obviously, it's tiring, so that's an additional challenge. And so when I was talking with people there, the main thing that the students, administrators said that they think sets apart ACEL from other schools in the region, besides being Jesuit, is that it really has a high standard of integrity and discipline. They have mandatory study hours. It's really unlike most of the government schools. There's a lot of bribery in the school system in Mozambique, and because it's conducted in Portuguese in rural areas, many people don't speak Portuguese, and they can arrive at high school bribing their way through the system and not being able to even answer basic questions in Portuguese. I mean, even at ACEL, the students who have arrived here, many of them can barely answer, like, if you ask their name in Portuguese. And so obviously, if they can't answer these basic things when all the other subjects are being taught in Portuguese, they're not learning anything, essentially. So to speak a bit about my research methods, I did interviews with students, teachers, and administrators on site because I was pretty isolated, so I didn't really have access to other people in the villages. I also did not know much about this region. There's not a lot written about it, so I went in with a very general approach. I was asking questions just about education and social justice and what people think sets apart this school from other schools that they've been in or been involved in. And through that, 3 main issues emerged that I kind of formulated my thesis around and then started to ask more direct questions about as I went through the interviews. I also did all of them in Portuguese, so I had a pretty lengthy transcription and translation process. And I also had no internet, so during the research that was really interesting because I couldn't look something up. If like someone was explaining a concept to me or I wanted to look up the history of a thing, I just really couldn't, and I was really reliant on the people, which I think was valuable because all the research I got was just really directly from what people were telling me. Okay, so the first issue I want to talk about is Portuguese language learning. So as I mentioned, most of the students speak, so the language there in that specific area is called Chichewa. Also, it's like a dialect of Sinyanja, so in some of them it might be substituted. So they often struggle with Portuguese because even if they have learned Portuguese in schools, they don't speak it at home because their families don't speak it, so it's really not reinforced outside of school hours. And when they're with their friends, they don't speak in Portuguese. So it's really hard to develop it fully. And it is a critical gateway, as I mentioned, to future educational, career, and other opportunities. So for that, what ESOL is doing to begin with is that they're offering extra Portuguese tutoring, and they're actually currently trying to restructure their entire schedule so that there's time for students who need it to have extra support, especially the ones who live in the boarding school. They have so many hours with them. And also other extracurricular activities to aid in the full development. And part of that, the other flip side of the coin, is that because these languages such as Chichewa were repressed during the colonial times, as a Jesuit institution focused on social justice, ACEL also sees it as its mission to allow for cultural expression through that, because obviously if they're not able to do that, it's not going to get passed on to future generations, and that's how many of their concepts and family histories are described to them, and that's how they grew up. So in order to do that, ACEL does incorporate Chichewa into, right now, extracurricular activities. When I was there, they had a talent show series, and amongst Portuguese, English, they also were allowed to do Chichewa, and it was welcome songs and dances. And at many other schools, it is repressed, and they're punished if they are heard speaking it even outside of class. So that's a pretty significant change at ACL compared to other schools. And students a lot of times mention that, and even especially professors who are a little older mentioned that they were punished and would have to like scrub bathrooms or something when they were growing up if they were heard speaking it. And also, another thing that really struck me that I was impressed by was the director of the school. He's a German Jesuit priest, and he had only been there for like less than a year when I was there. And he started learning Chichewa and was conducting parts of the daily masses in Chichewa, which I think is also really important to be able to practice their religion in a language that they understand. So they're not just sitting there through a mass that is in Portuguese and they don't understand any of it, possibly. So the next topic that emerged was the agricultural component. Basically, all the students are also enrolled in an agricultural class, and if for many of you who are familiar with Pope Francis's doctrines, he's a really big advocate for environmental justice, and agriculture is a really important part of that here. So they are taught innovative technologies, seeding techniques, different ways that they can better develop their own region through agriculture. And I think more importantly, what's really significant here is it instills in students the value and it teaches them that it is honorable to do agricultural work, because the reality is that many of them will not go on to government jobs. And so just being empowered and knowing that doing agricultural work and being trained in the best way to do that for their communities is a way to advance that. And it's not a bad thing, and they're not pushing that everybody has to go to university or pursue a job. So it gives them a mentality of working with what they have, and that was really beautiful. And I think a lot of other schools don't necessarily do that, and they're not equipping them fully with the academic tools. So that was really significant. And then the third topic I found that was really interesting was the community engagement aspect. ACL is also affiliated with a nearby agricultural Jesuit mission called Satema, and they actually host workshops for adults teaching them agricultural methods. And so there's this kind of intergenerational learning happening, because many of the parents of the students go to workshops and have jobs there, and then meanwhile the students are enrolled in classes at ACL, so it's really empowering community on a level beyond just the students themselves. And also because ACL is new, they're still building trust with the community and integrating themselves into it and trying to learn about where they are. So they invite all the local chiefs, usually if there's any big, like the talent shows. When I was there was Independence Day, so they were invited to come speak to the students and teach them the history. And also ACL does provide many jobs to people because they're still under construction and need general maintenance. They need to buy produce for the meals for the school. They fully employ the people around them first in that, and I think that also goes a long way to building like goodwill and getting to know the community. So this is kind of like a small recap of basically the three things I found that were most important. And I think for me, the research process was something I learned a lot about, especially internationally, with very little resources when you're doing it. And I know that if I ever do international research in the future, this is something that I will definitely draw upon my experiences here. Additionally, I had spent like the previous year learning Portuguese and taking classes here and learning so much about like the colonial history and different, Angola, Cape Verde, Mozambique was one of them. And then I studied abroad in Lisbon, and, we saw movies about the colonial wars here. And so being able to go there, talk to people, contextualize it, and like hear their stories of how it directly affected them. I think almost every single person I spoke with had families, because they were from the region, who moved to Malawi or Zambia or Zimbabwe. Many of them were still there, and they started their educational process there, had to come back. So getting to just hear all about that directly firsthand was also, I think, a really valuable, holistic component for my education. And so with that, I just really want to thank Rodney Jacob, our generous sponsor, without whom this wouldn't be possible, and then also my hosts at ACL, specifically Padre Fernando, Lyson and Matthias, Narciso, and then Tomas and David, who were Portuguese volunteers, for making me feel really welcome, introducing me to people, helping explain some words to me I didn't understand, and also just adding a lot of meaning and joy to my time that I spent there. So,
Thank you so much, Harshita. Great job. Now, without destroying the slides, it's my pleasure to welcome up Mary Breen. Mary is a student in the School of Foreign Service, class of 2019. She's majoring in science, technology, and international affairs with a concentration in security studies. She discovered a passion for tutoring adult immigrants in English as a second language in high school in her hometown of Ambler, Pennsylvania, and she's been able to dive deeply into this work here at Georgetown as a tutor for DC Schools Project with the Center for Social Justice. I feel like all of you were tutors for DC schools. In 2016, she participated in the Kino Border Immersion, an alternative break trip to the Arizona-Mexico border that explores the complexity and importance of immigration. She's in the SFS Undergraduate Scholars Program. She's conducted research and interviews for the Center for Latin American Studies. And with her passion for understanding migration, last summer, 2017, she conducted research along the Dominican-Haitian border through the ESJ project. So Mary, please come up. We look forward to hearing your presentation.
Hi, everyone. I wanted to thank the Center for Social Justice, the Berkley Center, and Rodney Jacob for making this fellowship possible. Thank you to Jennifer for her valuable help with the IRB process, and to Andrea, Sarah, Melody, and Jennifer for working closely with me over the past year. I'm very grateful to my local host in the DR, Father Mario Serrano Marte, and the staff of his organization. I'm Mary Breen, a junior in the SFS. This summer, I spent 3 weeks in the northern border area dividing Haiti and the Dominican Republic, primarily in the Dominican city of Dajabon. Through local interviews, I conducted research on the way in which formal and informal Jesuit education programs address the social justice challenges of this border community. In organizing my research, I aimed to understand the social justice challenges in Dajabon, the different Jesuit educational programs offered, and how they were or were not meeting the needs of people in this community. Ultimately, I found that the comprehensive and interconnected nature of Jesuit education effectively fits the needs of border populations with the formation in values through technical schools, radio coursework, and homes for young Haitian migrants. One aspect of my research that I would like to emphasize is that once in country, it was vital to go with the flow, making opportunities for myself when possible and engaging with the community. A concrete itinerary wasn't really in the cards, so saying yes to any opportunity thrown my way was important to making the most of my time there. One of the first experiences that came up was watching the binational market gates open. Although the opening of the gate here on market day may allude to some form of border control, in reality, the flow of migrants in the DR is nearly impossible to regulate. Whether people come on market days and stay in the DR, or whether they cross in more rural, less populated areas, the Haiti-DR border is an open border, and the tensions that exist here are historical, dating back to the colonization of both sides of the island by France and Spain, which led to very different cultures and societies on either side, and the way in which Dominicans remember the 22-year Haitian occupation in the 1800s. The Jesuits also have a long and complex history in the Dominican Republic and have had a presence at the border for over 80 years. One of their missions, established in 1997, served as my partner institution. Solidaridad Fronteriza, meaning the Border Solidarity, is an initiative of the Jesuits that accompanies, trains, and facilitates the organization of marginalized people in the region, both Haitians and Dominicans. My local host in the Dominican Republic was Father Mario Serrano Marte, a Jesuit leader and the national director of Border Solidarity. Dajabon faces several key social justice challenges. The border region in the DR is underfunded by the government since it lacks major urban centers and tourism destinations. Healthcare is costly and inaccessible to many residents. The border provinces of the DR experience higher levels of poverty than the national average. In particular, 51.6% of Dajabon's population lives in poverty. Many people don't have proper documentation, whether due to their own legal status or an inefficient documenting system at a governmental level. They lack access to any social assistance programs, and in some cases, this proves a barrier to education. Above all, the discrimination against Haitians is palpable. This is just a picture from my bus ride from Dajabon to the airport in Santiago. As you move east, Dominican soldiers at these checkpoints will board buses to profile in an attempt to find migrants trying to move further into the country. On a more day-to-day level, though, I lived with a very gracious woman, Leda. Her house was under a 10-minute walk from the border gate. She and I would sit on her porch, and she would point to me every time a Haitian walked by. On the one hand, levels of crime at the border are higher than other regions. I was there on the day Father Mario was robbed at a market by a group of Haitians armed with knives. Stories like these both validate the danger of the market, since some people do cross simply to rob, while also fueling the deeply entrenched anti-Haitian sentiment. I would sit at night with Leda and her friends, who were women that were strong in their faith and who had graciously welcomed me into their homes. When they spoke of Haitians, they expressed that in their eyes, Haitians were not humans. They didn't have hearts and were not loved by God. From the perspective of some Dominicans on the border, Haitians are very different from even other migrants of different nationalities, such as those from South America. With all of this in mind, I would like to explain the educational programs I focused my research on. The first point is formal education, specifically the Technical Institute of St. Ignatius of Loyola, or ETESL, which is a technical Jesuit high school. In interviews with students and faculty, it became clear that ETESL affects its students' perspectives on immigration by offering a formation rooted in Jesuit values. One ETESL student explains, "The Jesuits are people who simply work so that if a person needs help, they help them. More than an education of religion, it is an education in values and in help and service to others. I think a Jesuit education has an important role for us as people for my formation as a person." In the Dominican Republic, especially in the border region, many people fall outside the bounds of the formal education system, whether due to a lack of documentation, the necessity of working during the day, or living in a rural area without physical access. Radio Marianne addresses this need by broadcasting educational courses at the elementary and high school levels. The current director of Radio Marianne, Father Guillermo Jose Perdomo Montalvo, believes the station impacts the region at large. The way in which Radio Marianne discusses its neighboring country and immigration has drawn both Dominicans and Haitians into its audience. Father Guillermo explains, "There are people that listen to us due to the way we treat the themes. The curriculum in general is determined at the state level, but the examples, tones, explanations, and the way in which we help are from the Society of Jesus." With an open border, many migrants still manage to cross, and for the past decade, this has left many unaccompanied minors on the streets of Dajabon. Following the 2010 earthquake, many Haitian children came to the Dominican Republic because they lost their parents, family members, houses, and opportunities. Father Mario saw these unaccompanied Haitian boys living on the streets of Dajabon. In 2014, he founded El Hogar de Cristo, or Christ's Home, a shelter for unaccompanied migrant Haitian boys where they can sleep, eat dinner, bathe, receive formation each night, and experience community. Normally between the ages of 8 and 16, the boys only stay the night in the shelter and return to the streets during the day. On the most basic level, this home informally educates about 25 to 40 boys each night about their human worth. One boy at the shelter said, "The education given to us here includes how we can live between us as brothers. We learn how to live together." This boy gave me a tour of the neighborhood, pictured here, where Christ's Home is located. His father died in the 2010 earthquake, and he was one of the first boys Father Mario found sleeping in the park. Since the creation of the shelter, this boy has served as a leader and mentor for many others. He told me about his dreams to learn English, go to high school, and one day study at a college in the U.S. He radiated hope. As Father Mario put it, Dominicans and Haitians are two people that are facing great challenges, big challenges, but in the midst of those challenges, two people that live happily. That's an example of how hope remains in the midst of difficulties, and that helps us keep on dreaming that we can change this world through love, through engagement, through relationships, through solidarity. Thank you.